Hola muchachos, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Aquí tienen el horario para hoy, miércoles el 6 de noviembre. Here is where we last left off last class, talking about the use of the subjunctive with verbs of emotion, such as those listed here at the bottom of page 30. We talked about how the subjunctive fundamentally needs to have two different subjects, a subject in the main clause with a verb conjugated in the regular present indicative, and then a second different subject in what we would call the subordinate clause, followed by the conjunction que, and then accompanied by a verb conjugated in the subjunctive. But fundamentally, two different subjects combined with que need to be present in order for the subjunctive mood to be used. So this is where we left off last class. We completed the inténtalo at the very bottom of page 31, and then we pivoted over to expressions that require the subjunctive in activity 3. You guys made some statements toward the very end of class talking about one thing that you're happy about in general going on in your life, one thing you're fearful for, and then one thing that you find strange or interesting, I guess you would say. And this is where we last left off. I gave you a handout also. It looks like this. And here we also discussed problems that are taking place in these pictures, and then some useful expressions here at the bottom to articulate our subjective opinion about what's going on in these photos. So the vocabulario útil, very useful vocabulary to begin your subjunctive statements. And then in terms of articulating what's going on in the picture, you can utilize the textbook, pages 20, 21, have vocabulary, and then 22 in particular has an exhaustive list of verbs that we would use to articulate, what's going on in the environment. On the right-hand side there in the purple box. And then we did an activity utilizing those verbs in the subjunctive mood. So very similar to that activity, again on page 22, asking you guys to make some subjunctive statements about the problems that you see in this picture. For example, es una lástima, it's a pity, es ridículo, es terrible, es triste. Any one of these expressions of pity or regret, right, that this is the case. Es una lástima que, and then to throw trash, again, on page 22, the verb to pollute would work there. Ver. The verb to throw is not present there, but that's the verb tirar. T-I-R-A-R. And of course, you're welcome to use a vocabulary to utilize other vocab, utilize a dictionary rather, to come up with different vocabulary. And so back to that activity. Es una lástima que muchas personas tiren, T-I-R-E-N, tiren basura en la calle. Es terrible que las fábricas contaminen el aire, el agua, la tierra. Temo que, let's use a different verb. Temo que muchos animales estén en peligro de extinción. So a lot of different things going on here. Bit challenging in terms of putting all the vocabulary together, but I know you can do it using these expressions of emotion, right, at the beginning, and then conjugating your verbs that come after these phrases in the subjunctive mood. And a reminder that the grammar, rather, on page 14 would be very helpful to remind you of how the present subjunctive is formed, the endings in the present subjunctive, and then your irregular verbs, how those would conjugate in the subjunctive mood. So before we actually continue with this activity, and then on the other side you guys are coming up with kind of the positives, right, the solutions to said problems. Before we get there, I'm going to have you guys do the next page, and there are two sides to this, and simply create subjunctive statements, putting together all of the elements to form each of these sentences in the subjunctive mood. Tu compañero y tú son ambientalistas y van a escribir una carta al dueño o dueña de una empresa que contamina. Primero escribe las frases en la forma correcta y luego compártelas con tu compañero para organizarles por pares. So simply utilize all the elements in the statement, all the elements in the sentence to create a subjunctive opinion or observation. I'm going to do the first two with you, and then the last three you can create on your own. Now remember, page 14 would be very helpful in terms of how to formulate the subjunctive. Again, starting with the present indicative yo form. And then that would serve as your stem once you drop the O ending. And then add either your AR verb endings in the subjunctive or your ER, IR endings in the subjunctive. And if you're a little unsure as to what a verb would look like in the yo form, remember how I had shared with you in class, you can go to Spanish Dictionary, for example, or Word Reference, either one of those resources. Let's say the verb hacer, for example, which is the verb to do. Yes, you have it in dictionary form, but if you click conjugation, it'll tell you how that verb is conjugated in the present tense. You can see it there. So drop the O in hago, and that would be your stem, right? And so hacer in the subjunctive would be haga, hagas, haga, hagamos, and hagan. So that's a quick and easy trick. Type the verb in the infinitive. Just doing escribir as another example. See how it's conjugated in the yo form, in the present indicative, and then you have the present subjunctive for good measure. So let's take a look at the first two together. Es cierto, nuestra organización estudiar la ecología de la zona. It is certain or true that our organization studies ecology of the area or zone. So in the subjunctive mood, and all of these are subjunctive statements there at the very beginning. So in between this statement, which is an expression in the subjunctive, if we go back to page 30 of the textbook, that comprehensive glossary of expressions used in the subjunctive. This isn't an exhaustive list, these are just examples, but es cierto would be one of those impersonal constructions, right? And then after these, you're going to put que. So we're introducing the main clause and then putting que in between the main clause and the subordinate clause. So es cierto que nuestra organización would be the subordinate clause, the beginning of the subordinate clause. It would be the subject of the subordinate clause, and then the verb that comes thereafter, this is the verb that we would want to have in the subjunctive. Our subject is our organization. Nuestra, don't get nuestra confused with nosotros. Nosotros is we is a subject, right? Which would require a verb conjugated in the nosotros form. But nuestra is our. It's a possessive adjective. It's not a subject. So we have to look at the next word that comes after, and that's organización. Our organization is third person singular, right? We're talking about it being the organization. So third person singular conjugation of estudiar, which is an AR verb, would be estudie, right? So putting this all together, es cierto que nuestra organización estudie la ecología de la zona. And there you have a nice subjunctive statement put all together there. Main clause, que, subject of your subordinate clause, and then your verb conjugated correctly in the subjunctive. Page 30 is so crucial, laying that out for you guys, what it looks like, and some other examples to utilize, and then useful expressions of emotion. All right, let's take a look at number 2. No creemos el río Santa Rosa estar limpio. So, we do not believe. Creer is the verb to believe. That the Santa Rosa river is clean. Estar limpio is to be clean. So, put in the subjunctive mood. No creemos que el río Santa Rosa. And then estar, if you go back to page 14, is one of those irregular verbs in the subjunctive. Irregular meaning that it doesn't follow this methodology of, putting a verb in the present indicative in the O form and dropping the O. Star doesn't follow that. Star is irregular. And here is how a star would conjugate in the subjunctive. And since our subject is the river, it's also going to be like number 1 in the third person singular because we're talking about it, a body of water. And so your conjugation would be este, accent above the E. That's actually what makes estar irregular, is the accents above the letter E, last letter, in most all conjugations except for the nosotros form. So running it back, no creemos que el río Santa Rosa is our subordinate clause, the subject of our subordinate clause, and then the verb estar conjugated in the LA form is este. No creemos que el río Santa Rosa esté limpio. Go ahead and knock out 3, 4, and 5. 3, 4, and 5, there are no tricks and games. Contaminar is a regular AR verb. Morir, if you take a look in Spanish dictionary, morir, by the way, is the verb to die. Not the most flattering of verbs to look at. But in the yo form, it is irregular in that the O changes to UE. So this is how it would conjugate in the subjunctive. Muera in the yo form. And then I think there was one more other tricky one. Empezar is one of those stem changing verbs as well. Empezar is the verb to start or to begin. And if you look in Spanish dictionary, the way that it conjugates is that the E, second E rather, in empezar changes to IE. You guys are welcome to use Spanish dictionary as a resource to guide you. Take 10 seconds, 15 seconds to look it up, and it would mitigate any errors that you might potentially make. Alright, so that's what you're going to do for both sides of this handout. Create subjunctive statements for both estudiante uno and then also for estudiante dos. So complete both of these. The letter we're going to look at here in just a moment. There's one final activity I want to do before completing the rest of that handout, that packet, if you will. This is an example letter of what you guys are going to create here in a moment. A letter to a company outlining your worries or reservations about how they're harming the environment, and then proposing to them some possible solutions. It's exactly what you guys are doing here in this activity. And that's why I've kind of purposely paused so that you can kind of put all this together and implement it in for your letter, which is what you guys are going to submit next week when you submit this packet. For homework for next week, I just want you to come up with a rough draft. Come prepared to class with something to work with. That way we can dissect it and unpack it and work on it together so that you can really feel good about your final draft. And the final draft is what I'm going to have you guys put here on the paper. So we're going to do a rough draft first. And before we do that, let's take a look at an example. So for the example, they did not use the subjunctive mood for this example. What they did is they made some affirmative statements of just facts, if you will. Factual observations of how this factory, this company, is polluting the environment and the different types of pollution that are taking place, or environmental harms that are taking place. So what I would like you to do is I want you to use the expressions from that first page in the handout, the ones that are utilized to express the problems that you see. Use these expressions of, we'll call it negative emotion, right? Molestar, to bother. Temer, to fear. Tener miedo, to be afraid of. Or any one of these impersonal constructions as well would work. To make observations, or change, I guess you would say, the observations that you see here into the subjunctive mood. Not easy, but I'm going to show you how we can do that now. So, for example, la contaminación del aire, air pollution. La emisión de gases y partículas tóxicas por parte de su fábrica contribuye a la contaminación del aire. This is a fact. This is a statement, right? That the emission of gases and toxic particles on the part of the factory contributes to air pollution. How would I change that into the subjunctive mood? Step one, introduce one of these phrases at the very beginning. I'm just going to use the first one. Es una lástima. So going back, es una lástima que, it's a pity that, la emisión de gases y partículas tóxicas por la parte de su fábrica. And then this verb, it's a cognate. If you want to know what it is, copy it. Go back over to Spanish Dictionary, paste it, and it would tell you that it's the verb contribuir. Cognate, yeah? To contribute. How would it change into the subjunctive? Well, start with the O form in the present indicative, and then here you have your subjunctive conjugations. So going back to that example, es una lástima. Remember, we're changing this statement into the subjunctive. Es una lástima que la emisión de gases y partículas tóxicas por parte de su fábrica contribuya. Change that ending to the subjunctive ending, and you have now a subjunctive statement. What I want you to do is I want you to come up with 3 of these. Identify 3 environmental problems in this list and then transition them into the subjunctive mood.